What is my opinion about dominants who teach their submissives not to say no anymore? The submissive is not allowed to say why they, as the submissive, disagree. Ooh. I have a few points here. Consent is always, 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 always present in BDSM. Okay? Consent is a completely mindful, willing, and uncoerced choice to say yes and the ability to revoke that yes, aka saying no, okay, at any time without fear of repercussion. That standard of consent should always be present in BDSM. However, okay, and this is the sneaky however here. My however is not to discount the importance and necessity of consent. My however is to say we have macro consent and micro consent. In the vast majority of cases, when we are referring to consent, we're talking about micro consent, as in the dominant and submissive are having a conversation, and in that conversation, something comes up, and the submissive can revoke their consent in that moment. Micro consent, small, little instances of consent, right? The submissive is going through, let's say a certain type of scene with their dominant, and limits aren't crossed, but we feel like we might need to slow things down a little bit. We want to throw out a slow word. So it's touching on, it's speaking to micro consent. I have say here in this moment that I can maneuver, that I can revoke that yes. Okay. The thing is, with macro consent, that refers more to a dynamic that is 24/7 master-slave dynamic, in which the submissive shows up going, I choose in this moment to consent to having no micro consent. Does that make sense? We're giving the dominant macro consent. We're giving the dominant macro consent. We're saying, from this point on, I want to remove my micro consent. Okay? Now, I have to say a couple very, very, very important points here, especially when it comes to this discussion of these different types of consent. It should not be used. It should not be used for submissive training. Macro consent is not for submissive training. Not for submissive training. Macro consent is for well-trained, well-established dynamics with partners who have deep, 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 deep levels of trust and a complete 100,000% assurance of safety. That is where this belongs. You as a dominant, with a new submissive training a submissive, should never use macro consent as an excuse in training, because that makes you abusive and controlling. Macro consent is not something we use for submissive training. Macro consent, just needed to repeat that. Macro consent is not for submissive training. In submissive training, your submissive still needs to have that voice in these little moments, the micro consent. They should have it as you're training your submissive before the dynamic is so beautiful and fluid, where it's kind of just operating on its own. That's not how it is, but you know, you dominant submissives know when you've trained, when you've gotten into that flow of DS, it perpetuates itself. It motivates itself. That is when a trusted master and slave can agree to macro consent situation. Okay. What are the lines drawn? What are the lines drawn with that kind of consent? That is part of my next point. It should not be a one-sided expectation. I wholeheartedly believe, yes, a master can want macro consent, but if the slave, if the submissive also does not want macro consent and does not have the guidelines for macro consent, do not do it. Because like what Mobius is saying, the lines can be very, very confusing. And we need the submissive to be the one essentially calling the shots here in giving up that micro consent. That's a big fucking deal. And that's why it should not just be a request or a demand put on the submissive or slave from the dominant. That's abusive, that's controlling. And I don't think that's healthy in any way, shape, or form. That's why I'm saying the submissive, the slave, has to be the one, ideally, would be the one presenting this to their master. I trust you so much. I trust you so fully. That as an act of devotion to you, as an act of surrender to you, because you've been so good to me and I trust you, I want to give you my macro consent. I want you to understand that in the moment, I don't care what you tell me, I will yield, I will submit to you. Going there is a big fucking deal, and you better be able to completely trust the person that you make that decision with, submissives. Do not take it lightly. Macro consent should also not be given in sub-frenzy. Okay? SSC, safe, sane, consensual. Sane. You need to be grounded. You need to be present. You need to be in control of your emotions. Okay? Do not just show up eager, submissives, and go, I give you, a brand new person that I have no background or history with, I give you my micro consent. Here you go. Do whatever you want for me. There are no no's. I don't want to tell you no. I just want to do whatever you ask. No. This is for an established dynamic with a very, very well-functioning DS dynamic, a well-functioning power exchange, trusted partners. Okay? Sub-frenzy isn't mindful consent.